There's only two types of computer users out there: people who have lost data and people who will lose data. It's important to know how to manually back up a DHCP database, where those files are kept, and how to restore it. You and I will also get to take a look in this nugget at how we could migrate a DHCP server from one VM or one machine to another by first doing an export on the existing DHCP server and then doing an import to the new DHCP server. And with that, let's go directly to the lab and I'll walk you through it. So let's begin here on DC-Nug with the idea regarding backing up the DHCP server and its database. So to begin, let's launch the Server Manager right here from the taskbar. And here in Server Manager, let's click on Tools, and from the drop-down, we'll select DHCP. So while we're at it, let's bring in Server 2 as well. We can click on this icon here, or we could right-click on DHCP to add an additional server. We'll select Server 2 and click on OK. Great, so now we can see DC-Nug and Server 2. Fantastic. And if we expand IPv4 and we resize the window a little bit, this represents a lot of the work that we've done throughout our nuggets. Now, the good news regarding backing up is that it happens by default every 60 minutes. And the question may come up, well, where exactly are these files backed up? And we can ask the servers just by right-clicking on them here in the DHCP Manager, and then from the drop-down selecting Properties, and it tells us the database path where it's keeping its information, and also the backup path, which is under System Root, System32, DHCP, and the backup folder. So let's just take a quick moment and go take a look at the DHCP folder itself to take a look at some of the files that make up the database for DHCP. So we'll click on the File Explorer icon in the taskbar, and we'll click on this PC. We'll double click on the C drive. We'll double click on Windows. And then we'll hit S to go down to the S's, and we'll double click on System32. Then we can type D to take us down to the D's, and there is DHCP. If we open that up, here's our database files, and I'll expand that. And currently it's hiding some of these extensions for us. If we want to see those extensions, we can click on View. And from here, put a check in the box next to File Name Extensions so we can see the extensions on every file. So here in the DHCP folder, we have the dhcp.mdb. That's the main database file for DHCP. We've got some temporary files. We've got some log files and some history files. And this is where they're kept. And in the backup folder, that's where it makes the backups every 60 minutes. So if we wanted to trigger a server backup, we just right-click on the server. From the drop-down, select Backup. It's going to ask us where do we want to keep this backup. By default, it's pointing to the backup folder under DHCP. If that's where we want it, great. Click on OK to continue. And now it's backed up as of right now. Or we could also do that in PowerShell. In PowerShell, we can also do a backup. So if we bring up the PowerShell scripting environment using the icon on the taskbar, we could use the command backup dash, and then we'll do a control space to kick in the IntelliSense, and we'll select DHCP server and press F8 to execute that. Now the PowerShell option is asking us what is the path that you want to use. So here we type in the path, or if we have Explorer still open, let's go back there and double click on backup. We could right click for the path here and say copy address as text, and then we can just paste it in, which is going to save us some typing and also possibly some typos. So we'll go back to the PowerShell scripting environment, and in the bottom pane we'll do a Control V to paste in that path and press enter, and our backup is done. There's also a command for restore-DHCP server, which we could also use to restore it. Now for restoring the database, it's going to require a restart of the DHCP service. If we're doing failover, which we are in our lab, the peer is going to notice that the other system went down, which would start the clock on some failover events. And as a demonstration, let's go back to the DHCP Manager and let's tweak just a couple little parameters on our failover so we can see them come completely back after we do a restore. So to manage our failover, we can go ahead and click on IPv4, right-click on IPv4, and then from the drop-down select Properties. One of the tabs here is Failover. And currently we have two failover relationships, one between DC-Nug and Server 2 for an active-active scope, the load sharing scope, and the other is for the hot standby failover. And those are 10.3.3 and 10.4.4 respectively. So what I want to do is just edit the properties of those just a little bit. And I'd like to change the maximum client lead time. Having it set to 1 hour means that if the pairing is broken, which would happen if we restarted the DHCP service on one of those peers, it's going to wait for an hour before it says everything's honky-dory again. Even if the replication has reoccurred and they're all synchronized, it's going to wait that amount of time before all the warning flags go away. So I'm going to set it to 5 minutes for this relationship. Click on OK. And I'm going to do the same thing for the second relationship in the list as well by highlighting that, clicking on edit, and then specifying the maximum client lead time to be 5 minutes there as well. And with that set, we'll click on OK again, and then I'm going to force a replication, which will include those settings from DC-nug over to server 2. To do that, we'll right-click on IPv4, and from the drop-down, we'll select Replicate Failover Scopes, and then we'll click on OK to confirm, and it is done. So having done that, let's go ahead and play with a smaller database. Let's play with server 2. And on server 2, we'll go ahead and back it up by right-clicking on server 2, and from the drop-down, selecting Backup, and then accepting the default location for those backup files, which is in the backup folder underneath DHCP, underneath System32, and we'll click on OK. Next, let's go ahead and delete a scope off of server 2, and let's choose the scope we are going to split. So that's our split scope that we use the wizard to create. That specific scope is not being synchronized between the two different servers because that specific scope is not part of failover. So let's right-click on that scope, and from the menu select Delete, and click on Yes to confirm, and it is gone. However, because we have the backup that we just made, we can restore it. So let's go ahead and restore it. To do that, we're going to click on the server, right-click on that server, and from the menu select Restore. By default, it's going to point to that same backup folder under DHCP, which is fantastic. We'll click on OK. It's warning us it's going to have to restart the service for this to take effect. We'll go ahead and say yes, that's fine. And now it's stopping the DHCP service, it's restoring the files from our backup, and it's restarting the service. And we get a little message saying the database was restored successfully. Great. We'll click on OK. You'll notice over here on the left we have down arrows next to IPv4 and IPv6. So if we refresh that, we can just highlight the server and click on refresh. We have an icon here that's representing that we are in a recover wait state with the peer. And the reason that DC-nug is not showing that same thing is we need to refresh him too. So if we click on DC-nug and click on refresh, they both should show that state because they're both waiting for that max client lead time timer to expire down to 0. And then when we do a refresh, assuming they're all synced up, we should have green indicators on the icon indicating everything's good. So let's force a replication. We'll go to IPv4 on DC-nug, right-click, and from the drop-down select Replicate Failover Scopes. That'll do everything. We'll click on OK. It's basically indicating from all those messages that they're already in sync. So we're already synced up. Now we're just waiting for the timer to expire. If we right-clicked on IPv4 and went to Properties and then clicked on Failover, it's showing us here the failover status, lost contact with partner. And it's going to keep that state of lost contact with partner until that 5 minutes expires for the maximum client lead time. So if we click on Cancel here and we just wait the 5 minutes and click on Refresh, after the 5 minutes expires, because we now do have communications between these two devices, these icons should go back to green. So while we're waiting for that 5 minutes to pass, let's go ahead and do one more thing regarding moving a DHCP server. Maybe we have to migrate DHCP from one server to another. How do we bring all the settings with it? Well, there's an export and import function that we can use. And to do that, we can do it right in PowerShell. So in PowerShell, we can use the command export -DHCP server space. We can indicate that we want to include the leases, and we need to specify where we want to keep those. So on this server, if we go back to File Explorer, let's go to the C drive. And on the C drive, let's go ahead and make a folder right off the root just for convenience called DHCP export. All we need is some file location. It could be local or a network share to save the export information from the DHCP server. So now that we have a folder for DHCP export, let's go to the PowerShell scripting environment again. And we'll specify file, and I'm going to cheat again by going back to File Explorer, selecting that folder, and then just right-clicking up here and saying, please copy address as text. And then we can go back to PowerShell scripting environment and right-click and just paste it in. Then a backslash, and we'll specify the file name. Let's call it dc-nug underscore dhcp underscore export .xml. And if we want to see all the details as it does that export, we can throw on verbose to see those details. So then we'll go ahead and run the export-dhcp server command by highlighting line number 4 here and pressing F8 to execute that. And because the verbose option is on, it's giving us all the nitty-gritty details regarding that export. So then what we would do is take this export.xml file that we just created, and we would go to the new server, and on that new server, we'd use the command import -dhcp server space -leases space, and then we specify where the file is. I can just copy and paste that, space, all. Now, if we attempt to execute that here right on DC-nug, it's not going to be too happy about that. Why? Because it already has those scopes configured. It has the leases there. It has the reservations. And so by default, it's not going to want to overwrite the existing information that's already present on DC-nug. So again, the process would be export it from the DHCP server that you were using, and you import it to the new DHCP server that you want to use. And if we go back to DHCP Manager and do our refresh, all the indicators should go back to green. And if we select IPv4 and right-click on it and go to Properties of IPv4 and then go to Failover, now for the failover status, it's showing normal. Because the 5-minute countdown that we set for the max client lead time is counted down to 0, and we have communications going back and forth between those two servers. And that would be true for our load balancing relationship, and if we click on the other one for hot standby, it's true for that one as well. And now, my friend, it is your opportunity to practice what we've done in this nugget in the hands-on lab. So have some fun doing that, and I'll see you in the next video. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.